So 4 years ago, when you called me to come back as your pastor, and Christy and I moved here, I decided, you know what, this time, being a little older, being a little wiser, being that our kids are older and kind of out of the house, I'm going to embrace being more of an outdoors person, right? Many of you know I'm a city kid. Grew up in the city, love being around the city, energized by being in the city and all the stuff going on. But I said, you know what, when we get back to Kalispell, then we are just going to try to find ways. And during those times, we now go huckleberry picking and cherry picking, and I've always liked to hike, so we're hiking even more and doing all those things. But after my first year of living here then, Pastor Mike says, hey, let me take you fishing. And I said, okay, I don't have anything, but okay, we can do that. And so Mike has given me the opportunity a couple times to go fishing with him. And I remember that first time, like going, all right, this is fishing. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know what I need and what I have. I do remember that when Caleb was younger, when I was here as the youth pastor, and Caleb was in early elementary school, that he wanted to go fishing. And so I went to the store and I bought him the little kids fishing stuff. And we went to one of these great stock ponds that they have in town for kids to fish for free out of and all that. And so we tried that, and we tried it, and we utterly failed, right? Failed so much that even Caleb didn't want to try fishing again. And so it wasn't much of a fishing experience. I remember as a child growing up, my grandpa took me fishing a couple times. I don't remember, maybe my dad took me once or twice too, but my dad is a city person too. So I remember one time my mom's third husband, Mike was his name too, obviously, but Mike took me fishing. He loved to fish on the Columbia River and get steelhead and sturgeon and all those kind of fish as they run. And he took me once, and he just couldn't put up with me being on the boat and my questions and my thoughts and my 12-year-oldness, I guess. And so he never took me again. And so my fishing experience is very limited. And so Pastor Mike says, hey, we're going to go fishing on Thursday. I got time in my schedule. I'm going to take you on Thursday. And I said, okay. So I have a couple days. And so what do? I got to figure out now, where do I get a license? And then I got to go to the store and figure out, hey, I need to buy some gear, right? I need some basic gear. And so I look at all this stuff, and it's quite overwhelming if you don't know what you're doing to go to Snappy's or to Cabela's or even to Walmart, and there's all this fishing stuff, and you're not sure what you really need and how much of it is things that they're just trying to sell you so it looks flashy and you look good. I don't want to be one of those yahoos that show up with all this gear on and have Mike just laugh at me because you're not a yuppie, you're just here, right? And so I try to figure it all out, and I said, okay, what do I remember about fishing? And so I end up going and finding what I need and get all that gear, and I meet Mike at his secret fishing spot, right? He says, meet me here, and he gives me directions and puts it on my GPS for me. He won't tell me where it's at and what it is because it's his secret fishing hole. And like many of you have your fishing holes, right? And so I imagine that day that I show up, and all I know about fishing is when I was a kid, so I show up with my fishing pole, right? And you know how kind Mike is, so he made sure that I knew that I made the wrong choice for fishing, right? You don't fish with this when you're a 40-some-year-old man, right? Well, how was I supposed to know? I just went to the store and looked up stuff and did all that. And so, of course, after he was done teasing me and making fun of me for having my little fishing pole, then he took me back to a secret spot. And I think we went to a secret spot and then even further back in the secret spot so no one else would see that I was fishing with this pole, right? I think he was making sure that I wasn't going to. So then it was like, oh, well, what does it matter? This is just it's a fishing pole, right? You put the right... obviously, I put the little fake fish on it, but you put a hook on it, you throw it out there with the right kind of bait or what lure or whatever you're using, and you catch the fish on it and you reel it in. Why does it really matter, right? But the important thing is, though, that yes, as you get older, you need to figure out what is the stuff that you should be using. And we get this attitude in us of what should be used by God and what God should use to teach us and to direct us along the way, that then when we see something like this happen, we laugh at it and we make fun of it because that's not the right way. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And so the joke was on Mike that day as Paw Patrol was in full patrol, and I scored more fish than he did that day. And they were all about this size, but I got more. No. This is a fish story. This is a real fish story. No, but what did I do? What I did was I said, okay, Mike, I want to go fishing with you. Now let's go to Snappy's, and you show me what to buy. You show me what I need as far as being able to go fishing with you. And we did all that, and we looked at that. And so I did, yes. So that was I did not show up with this. Actually, Christy just bought this at Walmart on Thursday for me. As I said, hey, I got this great sermon illustration. And it'll be lots of fun that way. But sometimes we think about we have the wrong pull. And sometimes we think about what God wants us to do and the way that God does things in our life. And we say, God, you're using the wrong pull. God, you're doing it the wrong way. God, you're not doing it the way that I think you should be doing it. And you're not using the right people or the right places. You're not using the right things, and you're not taking care of me the right way. That we say, God, you are using the wrong fishing pole to catch the fish that we're supposed to be catching. And so we like to tell him how to do his job. We like to tell him what it takes to get things accomplished. We like to tell God what to do. And today, in our continuation this summer of the minor prophets, we come to a minor prophet who has a problem with something that God is doing. That God is not currently at work amongst his people. And so this minor prophet likes to just shout out and tell God that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're not taking care of your people. And then when God responds to his prayer, he says, no, God, you're taking care of it the wrong way also. And so today we look at the prophet Habakkuk. And if you really want to say it right, you get that nice little curl in the back of your throat as you say that double K, right? And you can almost sound like you're Jewish. Habakkuk, right? Habakkuk. And so Habakkuk is again in the middle there of the Old Testament minor prophets, the last 12 books of the Old Testament. Habakkuk's name means to embrace. It is found twice in the book that bears his name, and then nowhere else in the entire Bible. So we don't even know much about him or about who he was and how long he lived or any of those things. But Habakkuk looked at the people of Judah. He prophesied to the people of Judah. He looked around him and he saw how far they had gone from God. He saw that they were no longer worshiping and trusting in God anymore, that they were worshiping other idols and that they had brought in other sins and they were mixing culture together with their religion and they were doing all these things that were not following the ways that God had told them to live. And as he watches the people not living right and not doing the right things, he starts praying to God. And so this book of Habakkuk, these 3 chapters, is kind of a prayer time, if you will. It's a prayer time of Habakkuk praying to God, talking to God about his complaints about the people, and then God's response to him, and then his complaint about God's response, and then God's response back to him, and then finally with him singing a praise, praying a praise to God, that God will work and that things will work out. So kind of that last rest. So it starts with a complaint. Chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 says, Lord, how long will I call for help and you not listen? I cry out to you violence, but you don't deliver us. Why do you show me injustice and look at anguish so that devastation and violence are before me? There is strife and conflict abounds. The instruction is ineffective. Justice does not endure. Because the wicked surround the righteous, justice becomes warped. And so he's seeing all the bad things going on around him. And he's seeing that how the evil people and the evil ways and practices are overtaking those who are truly trying to follow God. Have you ever been there before where you've noticed that around you? Maybe you look around your neighborhood, you look around the community, you look around our town a little bit, we watch the news and we see stuff going on in the country and around the world, and we're just stuck kind of shaking our heads. Going, God, you created all this. God, all these people are meant to follow you. Why aren't they? Why is evil having its way? Why does evil seem to be winning right now? Why does there seem to be more fun and more power in those who are evil than those who are trying to follow you? And even within those who are following you, God, how come they're mixed up? How come there's fighting amongst them? How come they're not living the way they're supposed to be living? And God, why aren't you taking care of it? Why aren't you just zapping them, just taking care of it all and getting it out of the way? Why don't we see you putting a stop to this craziness that we see in the world around us? That's what Habakkuk is basically praying here. And the ultimate question that we have when we see bad things going on around us, that Habakkuk has here, is why doesn't God just put a stop to things? Why doesn't God just put a stop to this stuff? He is God. He is all-powerful. He is the creator of all this around us. There is nothing stronger than him, nothing that knows more than him, nothing that can control him. He has allowed evil to come into creation and have its way, but it still is not more powerful than God. Yet oftentimes God seems quiet. Oftentimes God seems to be just sitting back and watching and seeing what's going on. A lot of times God just seems to be ineffective around us because we're not sure what we're looking for when it comes to God. After all, doesn't God realize that we have people starving in our world? Doesn't he see that there is famine? Doesn't he see that our country just the last month has had excessive heat and hurricanes and all kinds of things going on? Doesn't he see that we have corrupt government officials? Doesn't he see that we have a lot of people looking out for their own good instead of God's goodness and looking out for the good of others? Why isn't God intervening? Why isn't God participating? Why does it seem like he's just being silent and he's just waiting and waiting and waiting? And so Habakkuk has this prayer, and we've had these prayers too, where we're just waiting for God to work. We're waiting to see God just put his hand in things and take care of stuff around us. We like to count down, especially nowadays. We like to count down like it's almost the end times. Like, all right, one more thing and we're there, aren't we? And God says, I will let you know when it's time. But God answers Habakkuk's prayer. God answers him in a way that Habakkuk doesn't really like. Starting at verse 5, he says, look among the nations and watch. Be astonished and stare because something is happening in your days that you wouldn't believe even if told. I am about to rouse the Chaldeans, that bitter and impetuous nation which travels throughout the earth to possess dwelling places it does not own. The Chaldean is dreadful and fearful. He makes his own justice and dignity. His horses are faster than leopards. They are quicker than wolves of the evening. His horsemen charge forever. His horsemen come from far away. They fly in to devour swiftly like an eagle. They come for violence. The horde with all their faces set toward the desert. He takes captives like sand. He makes fun of kings. Rulers are ridiculous to him. He laughs at every fortress. Then he piles up dirt and takes it. He passes through like the wind and invades, but he will be held guilty, the one whose strength is his God. And so what does God say? God says, I'm going to send the Chaldeans to take care of you. Who were the Chaldeans? The Chaldeans were the Ninevites. The Chaldeans were the Assyrians. The Chaldeans were those reckless people that Jonah didn't want to go preach to. That last week we talked about the fact that they were going to be destroyed soon because they had repented and followed God, and then 150 years later they were no longer following God. These are the people that were getting ready to take care of Israel and take over. These were those ruthless invaders, those ones that would come in and steal and destroy and kill people and take slaves and all those kind of things. These were the people that were left of the Ninevites that were taking no prisoner on everything around them. And so God replies that he is going to punish Judah. All right, so Habakkuk, you want me to punish my people, and so I'm going to punish my people by sending an evil people your way to take care of you. And I'm just going to take my hands off the wheel. I'm just going to allow it to happen. Habakkuk, of course, will be confused. God, why are you showing up with a kid's fishing pole when we need a big-time fishing pole? We're going fishing up in Alaska. We need more than just this. God, why are you allowing a wicked nation to punish your people? God, why are you allowing evil to punish those who are good? The message of Habakkuk is very simple. That God is going to use Babylon to punish his people for their sins. Then he is going to use another nation, and that's what's at the end of those verses there. He's going to use another nation to punish them because they were so much more evil. And I'm sure we've all struggled with that question. What if the United States, and I love our nation, and I spent this last week at teen camp, and at teen camp, because it was so hot in eastern Montana, we actually started our day with group games instead of doing it in the middle of the day. And so we started our group games, and inspired by our group games and inspired by the Olympics, we had a group of students that decided every time we gathered each morning that we were going to sing the national anthem. Or we did the Pledge of Allegiance, or we did God Bless America. We started with some kind of national pride, right? We were getting ready to do the games together. And it was kind of fun, and the kids, especially the college kids from Northwest Nazarene University, were a little confused. Like, this must be a Montana thing, because we haven't seen it at any other camp. And it was quite fun. But we're proud of our country, and we're proud of who we are. But we've seen our country turn away from God. And what if God was giving this message to us, and God said, I'm going to send the Russians to take care of you. I'm going to send the Chinese to take care of you. I'm going to send the Taliban to take care of you. All these countries that we look at as being more evil than most of the other countries in the world that are seeking out their own good, what if God said, I'm going to send one of those to punish you because you haven't been following my ways, and you need a wake-up call. And then I'm going to send somebody even worse to take care of them. We struggle with this question because we don't understand why God allows evil things to get in the way, evil things that can be used. But what we fail to understand sometimes is that God is a God who has created all this earth. That God is all powerful, and he can wipe out all those groups as well. And he can take care of all of them. But because he doesn't, he allows things to happen to help prove a point sometimes, to help us learn something from them. He wants the fact that he is able then to utilize what is available around us, and then he wants us to be open and hear from him during those times. We struggle with this question because we struggle with that idea because we understand that through Jesus, God is love, and that God wants to take care of us, and God wants to provide for us, and God wants what's good for us. But when we're not focused on God, then how can God get through to us? How can God get his point across to us? Sometimes he has to use what's available and what's around him and give us those opportunities. If he is the good shepherd, if he is the one who takes care of us, if he is the one who loves us like a shepherd loves his sheep, if he wants what is good for us, then why do I have to put up with that annoying coworker? Why do I have to live next to a foul-mouthed partying bachelor who has women coming in and out of his house all the time? Why must I live in a house with parents who are constantly arguing and fighting with each other? Why is cancer even a thing? We believe the lie that says when we follow God that everything is perfect and that all of a sudden we live in this Jesus bubble and that everything bad in the world is just going to bounce off us all the time. But the sad reality is that we live in a world that is run by sin right now. That God is in control over it, but he's allowing sin to have its way, and so it looks like it's in control. We aren't promised that life will be perfect. We're not promised that we will be free of all of these different things going on around us. But we are promised that we can have peace in our hearts through it all. And we are promised that God will be there by our side through it all. And we are promised that one day, when He's ready, He will make all things right. And He will correct all these things. And unfortunately, you read the book of Revelation. We preached through it last summer. The book of Revelation, there's a ton of bad things that have to happen before we get there. You guys can check off whatever you want for the end times, but until I see a giant sea beast come out of the ocean, I'm not starting my checklist yet. That's it for me. Once I see Godzilla coming up, then I'm ready. And so we, unfortunately, have to live in so many levels, putting up with the evil that is around us, finding a way to not let it penetrate our lives, finding a way to live out against it, to stand up against it, to be a voice of God's truth and God's love to those around us. Habakkuk is crying out because God is using the wrong pole. He's not supposed to be using evil people. He's not supposed to be using bad things. He's not supposed to be using other stuff. He's supposed to be using what is kosher and what has been approved by the temple. He's supposed to be using the things that we say are holy. He's supposed to be using these things to reach others. And one of the reminders that I always have is that we live in such a changing culture that sometimes that level changes a little bit. And it's not so much evil and bad and putting up with those things, but it's the fact that sometimes we have our message that is the truth, that is Jesus Christ is the truth. He is the way, and He is the only way to God. We have that message of Jesus, but sometimes we need to change how that's presented. And sometimes that looks a little different. And sometimes that looks a little uncomfortable. But we say, God, how can you allow these things to happen around us? How can you allow these things to happen? And unfortunately, God says, because I'm in control. God says, because I have the power and I have the strength and I can redeem you through any of that stuff that happens. We can pull, but still catch fish. I remember when I was in high school and I felt my call to ministry in 9th grade, and I was bugging my pastor, and I was asking him all kinds of questions about what it means to be a pastor, and what does this mean in the Bible, and what does that mean, and what does it look like, and blah, 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 and being new to it. And eventually he stopped me, and he said, Joe, you don't have to know everything. God knows it all, and He revealed it to you as you need to know it. That didn't stop me from asking him more questions, but I remember that kind of response. And that's kind of what sometimes I feel like I wish we could just say, that why does God allow bad things to happen? Why is there evil around us? Why is there sin in the first place? And unfortunately, sometimes we just got to be okay with the fact that God knows why. And that God is putting things into play for us to help us through it and to guide us through it and to provide for us through those tough times that we have. There are so many things in this world that we don't understand. There are so many things that we can't even possibly understand. That we have our vision and our thought about God and who He is and what He can do, and we put it in this little box called our mind. And God says, I'm going to blow up that box. Because I know so much more, and there's so much more than what you see right in front of you. An old hymn of the church reminds us of that in the opening lines of it. It says, God moves in a mysterious way, His wonders to perform. And it's just that reminder that there is a living mystery around us about God and the ways that He works. And if we sometimes can't just put our trust and our faith in God and believe that He's going to work through it, and that He's going to work it all out, and we read the book of Revelation and we know it's all going to end right, then sometimes we just have to be okay with the mystery that lies between now and then. Habakkuk just couldn't understand, nor could he reconcile the fact that God would teach His own people a lesson. It just doesn't go with our understanding of God's holiness and God's love. We may not understand His ways, but the person of faith, the person who is focused on God, knows that even in those tough times, that there is a trust and a belief that God will help carry you through. and that God will be with you all the way through it. Habakkuk had a life of faith in God. He had been following God. He was prepared for God to react and God to do something big. He has been there and he's heard the traditions over the years of the fact that God had showed up in big ways to make noise to his people, to get their attention, right? He had separated the Red Sea. He had provided manna in the desert. He had provided victory over enemies. He had done all these great things. Yet he couldn't understand why God had to then use evil people to teach a lesson. But Habakkuk did something that we need to do. That when we go through those times where we don't understand, those times when we question God, those times when we're frustrated with life, when we're not sure what's happening next and we're on our 200th doctor appointment and we're still not finding answers, when we're living paycheck to barely paycheck, when we're not sure where we're supposed to be living next, or the jobs are just frustrating and we want to work somewhere else, but we don't know where else, that we need to be reminded of what Habakkuk does at the very end of the book. One of the other names that Habakkuk is known by is he's known by the prophet of the watchtower. And it starts really in Habakkuk 2, verse 1, where he says, I will take my post. I will position myself on the fortress. I will keep watch to see what the Lord says to me and how he will respond to my complaint. Notice what Habakkuk says he's doing here and what he's starting here. He doesn't say, well, God's going to use something that I don't want him to use, so I'm running away from God. He doesn't show up and see that God is using a children's fishing pole and laughs at him so much that he loses focus on what God's doing. He doesn't say, I'm not getting my way, so I am going to do something else. He doesn't start yelling and screaming at God. He doesn't say, well, I don't like how the church is spending my money, so I'm not giving a tithe. He doesn't say, well, I don't like that they're not teaching the Bible the way I want it taught, so I'm just not going to go to Bible study anymore. He doesn't say, God, I'm taking you hostage and I'm going to try to manipulate you to do things my way, or else I'm not going to believe in you anymore. But like a true fisherman, Habakkuk says, I'll use the fishing pole that you gave me, God. I'll use what you have given me. I'll throw my line into the water and I'll sit and I'll wait until the fish show up. I'll sit and I'll wait. I don't think this is right, and I don't think this is the kind of pole I should be using. But if you want me to, God, then there it goes. Oh, there it really goes. The fish. I didn't tie it right. I didn't tie it how you taught me, Mike. I didn't tie it how Pastor Mike taught me, so I lost my fish even. He got loose. Someone gets free plastic dinner. But because you told me to do this, God, then this is what I'm going to do. It's not quite my way, and it's not quite my understanding. It's flying back. It's not quite my understanding. And it's not quite, he got thrown back. But what does Habakkuk do? He says, you know what? I'm just going to keep doing what you tell me to do, God. I'm just going to keep moving. I'm just going to keep fishing. I'm just going to keep going one step after another. I'm going to keep sharing your message. I'm going to keep sharing your love. I'm going to keep living the life that I've been called to live. I'm going to keep doing the things you've called me to do. I'm going to be the person of God that I have been made to be, even though life is terrible right now. Even though I just don't understand what is going on around me. Even though I want to just go hide in my bedroom the rest of the day and not watch any TV or listen to anything. I just want to go hide in a corner. Actually, after being at teen camp all week, that sounds pretty good. But God, I'm going to be out there and I'm going to keep doing what you've called me to do. And that's what Habakkuk's challenge to us is. That we may not like how things are going on in the world around us. We may not enjoy the way the world is and all the craziness that we have to see going on around us. Who's running for president this week and who's not and who is and then not and then is. I don't know. All that kind of stuff. Who's attacking who and what wars are going on. We see all that stuff. But we need to wait for God. We need to stay in prayer, stay in communication with God, stay in talking to Him about it, talking with Him about it, seeing how He talks to us about it, reading our Bibles and studying more about what He wants from us, spending time together as a church family in worship and in Bible study and in prayer. One of our focuses this year has been our first Sunday prayer time. And so tonight is the first Sunday of the month. So tonight at 5:30, we'll gather in this room for a time of prayer, praying for our church, praying for the future of our church, praying for our church leaders, praying for our church members, praying for our community, praying for other needs that are brought in. And if you can't make it at 5:30 to be here in person, at 6:45, I go online on our church's Facebook page. And those who get on then will get a time of prayer that's not quite as deep and intense a time of prayer as it is here in person. But as they get online and they type in the chat column a prayer request, I pray for each and every one as they come up. But it's that opportunity of just saying, God, we don't know what's going on around us, but we know that we can trust in you. We know that you will provide and you continue to provide. And so that then, as we focus on God instead of focusing on those things around us that are trying to distract us, then we can start to focus in, like Habakkuk focuses in chapter 3, where it becomes more about praise than it is about worry and anxiety and frustration. That even through this hard time and a time that he doesn't understand what's going on, he's still able to focus in. Chapter 3, verse 2 says, Lord, I have heard your reputation. I have seen your work. Over time, revive it. Over time, make it known. What is it? God's reputation. Make yourself known, God. Revive us. Make it known that though angry, remember your compassion. And then he continues on to praise God. And I'm going to jump down to verse 16 as he concludes this time of prayer. And he says, I hear and my insides tremble. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters my bones. I tremble while I stand, while I wait for the day of distress to come against the people who attack us. Though the fig tree doesn't bloom and there's no produce on the vine, though the olive crop withers and the fields don't provide food, though the sheep is cut off from the pen and there are no cattle in the stalls, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my deliverance. The Lord God is my strength. He will set my feet like the deer. He will let me walk upon the heights to the director with stringed instruments. The truth is, God doesn't match our expectations because God has higher expectations for us. He has higher hopes for us and dreams for us. And what we're called to do during those times where frustration is setting in, those times when discouragement come in, those times when we're not sure what's next. And at this time, Habakkuk is like, I'm going to sit back and wait for these bad things to happen, but I'm going to pray that you will still work and you will revive your people through it all. That as we think about things going on around us and we get overcome by things, we're called to remember the things that God has done for us in the past, the ways that God has provided for us, the ways that God has given us strength to overcome things that we didn't think we could overcome. That even though we're going through a time of slowness, even though we're going through a time of frustration, even though we're going through a time where we feel God is being silent, we're not giving up because we know that God is there and God is at work around us. We are called to put our full trust in Him as we follow Him through this journey. It's not just about plugging in when things are great and then unplugging when things get frustrating or get tough. I love baseball, and I love watching baseball all year long. And I hate the fans that go, oh, look, our team's winning, our team's winning, our team's winning. And then they start losing a few games. What team? What team? That's not my favorite team. that God doesn't want us to be fair weather fans. He wants us to be all in. He wants us to be plugged into Him. He wants us to be reminded that I can't do any of this without His help, without His strength. That when I signed up and put my faith and my trust in Jesus Christ, that in the fine print, there is a small sentence at the end of that contract. It's kind of like when you go sign up for a car and you got all those words you never really read right at the end. One of those sentences there says, you won't understand everything. Now, that should be in the Bible, really. That should be, you will not understand everything. God doesn't promise you'll understand everything. But what He promises is that if you put your faith in Him and your hope in Him, He will be there with you all along the way. And He will help you to get through it. And that He will be there journeying with you through this life, through all the ups and the downs. Sometimes we just need that reminder. We need that reminder that we serve an unstoppable God who was with us all along the way. And we're going to close with a video.
In the beginning, there was an unstoppable plan. An arrangement that was so outrageous that all nature was created just to accomplish its ends. And the whole vastness of uncreation, the whole expanse of non-existence couldn't impede our insuppressible God from creating a universe out of His simple insistence. For that which may look like an obstacle is really just proof that our God is unstoppable. And ours is a history filled with obstacles. From the lies of the serpent, to whom God promised His heel, to the fruit of the tree that He promised would kill. From the murderous Cain that brought forth Abel's crying blood, to the worldwide epidemic of sin that called down the flood. From the massive Red Sea that stood in Israel's way, to the chariots that pursued her so that she may be slain. From the mocking giant that stood between David and his crown, to the giant walls of Jericho that without a touch came tumbling down. From wild beasts like Daniel's lions and Jonah's enormous fish, nothing can stop our God from doing all that He may wish. Because that which may look like an obstacle is really just proof that our God is unstoppable. And nowhere is this truth more true than in the truth of Emmanuel. Because it truly is incalculable to try to count the number of plans that had to take place for God to be born as a babe in Bethlehem. But neither Mary or the manger or Herod or his wise men were outside the woven fabric of God's forbearing intention. From the womb that bore Him to the hands that raised Him. From the coins that bought Him to the lips that betrayed Him. From the cords that bound Him to the crowd that abased Him. From the whips that scourged Him to the crown that debased Him. From the nails that held Him to the cross that slay Him. Everything that man and Satan could do to subdue Him was only and always part of God's plan to do through Him. Because even in the crucifixion, that which may look like an obstacle is really just proof that our God is unstoppable. For even as He lay in the grave. God's power became uncomfortable because death laying claim to our God is absolutely unsuitable. So he altered the unalterable, revoked the irrevocable, made vulnerable the invulnerable. God made death and his grave the main stage for his most remarkable surprise. He made the end of life its beginning through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ. So now, neither death, sin, nor Satan, not man or the wars he wages, not powers, leaders, or thrones, not martyrdom, tortures, or woes, not our apathy, greed, or hypocrisy, not the plans or strongholds of the enemy. Nothing can shake the unshakable inevitability of our God's mighty intent. Because anything that even seems with God's plans to contend are really just the means by which he is accomplishing his ends. So may we never forget to ponder the imponderable fact that whatever God plans is completely unavoidable, because that which may look like an obstacle is really just proof that our God is unstoppable.